Hi everyone, it's Adam with Milo's Restoration, and today I've got a video about a laminate but like a vintage style dresser that I found at a thrift store. You know, unfortunately, there's not always a nice piece of antique or, you know, really authentic kind of branded vintage furniture waiting for me at the thrift store whenever I go in my spare time, but I was able to pick this up, and I think that with the addition of some high gloss lacquer, I think I can make it look like something that people might want to buy. So this is just crud cutter and water. I really find that crud cutter is definitely one of the best products to use for removing grease or any kind of other contaminants. And then you just need to make sure that you rinse it really well. And if it's a really stubborn grease, I'll use a Scotch-Brite, but usually I just like to use a damp microfiber to rinse it off with. So this piece of furniture, while certainly not my favorite from the outset, it's definitely not a very badly damaged piece of furniture. So in that case, I really just need to do a scuff sand on it. And there are some little kind of dings and stuff like that that will become more apparent after you prime it. But even if you looked at it with it pretty closely with a light, it still looks like a very clean piece of furniture, and the kind of dings would be hard to see until after you prime it, and then that'll be a good time to glaze it. But I did see a few pieces that need to be glazed before priming. Um, but you know, typically you don't want to glaze an unfinished surface, but technically this is already a finished surface. It's got a varnish on it, and it had a primer applied to it. So this is Exalta's primer, and it's called a Merriam, and it's basically an undercoater for a lacquer, pre-catalyzed lacquer. So you've seen my videos before. You know I like to use a lot of pre-cat lacquer, and this is not going to be any different. I'm going to use a different brand than I typically use, but the only difference is really is that it's not a vinyl sealer. So that's kind of one thing that I don't really like, but if you have seen my other videos, you know that typically what I do is I like to tint my primer and then spray over that with a clear coat. Just really because I find that the spray characteristics of most of the tinted lacquers is not as good as a clear lacquer. So what ends up happening typically is that you get a much shinier finish by using a clear coat than you do a gloss ready mixed lacquer. And the way that you add your color is just by using your primer. The only thing that's difficult really is that you have to make sure that you don't sand through your primer anywhere, which honestly kind of makes you a better painter because, you know, really you shouldn't be sanding through your primer even if you're using a pigmented top coat. So I'm sanding the first coat here, and I want to try to make sure that I'm still sanding for flatness here, so I will try to kind of sand back things aggressively. I prefer to use a, you know, an orbital sander of some kind for the first couple coats of sanding, if I do 3 coats, which is rare. But on the last coat, I like to just hand sand everything because I want to make sure I don't burn through the primer anywhere. So that's pretty important. But other than that, really, you know, at this point, it's just a matter of getting everything flattened out. And another thing is that I kind of noticed about this product whenever I first used it is that it says that it's spray ready, and it actually is, which is pretty rare. Most products that I've used, even the products that I really like a lot, they say that they're spray ready, but they're really not. And yeah, I have noticed that this American product is spray ready. The lacquer, as well as the top coat, as the primer, it all seemed like it was pretty much ready to use out of the can. But yeah, I did my second coat, and then I let that set up and sanded it lightly. So I finished hand sanding the first coat, and then I mixed up a quart of this lacquer to spray, and it's the Amerium Water White Pre-Catalyzed Lacquer in Gloss. And I add a little bit of blush retarder, maybe more than a little bit, just to make sure I don't get any blushing. I don't really care so much about the kind of slower drying times. I find that my gun lays out the material pretty well, so I really don't have that issue with this gun, although with some other cheaper guns it definitely benefits. But other than that, really, I just put a little bit of lacquer thinner just to make sure that it lays out well. And I use a light. That's probably the best thing that I can tell you, is that you need to use a light with a protected switch on it to make sure you're not putting yourself at risk of having any kind of explosions or anything, as well as all of the extraction fans that I have. They all have encapsulated switches on them, with the exception of the like box fans, but those usually aren't on while I'm spraying non-water based material. Other than that though, I definitely mix this up a little bit hot, as you can see, but it sprayed really well. You just want to make sure that whenever you're spraying, you have that light and you're using it, and you're making sure that you're keeping a wet edge, and that you're not leaving any areas of dry spray or anything like that. That's really important, and that is what really gives you the full sheen of the gloss. Because if you have areas of dry spray and areas where you didn't completely keep that wet edge alive, then what ends up happening is it starts to look kind of like a satin or like a matte finish, which is definitely not what you want. You know, you're after that glossy look. You can see a reflection in it, and to get that, a lot of it is just how you spray. So this was the start of the second coat, and I just spray 2 coats back to back. Basically, I give them enough time to flash off and dry, and if I don't have any reason to sand, then I don't sand. I try to make sure that I have a good smooth surface that doesn't have any kind of little debris or any trash in it, and then I just go straight to spraying my next coat. It's very efficient, it's very fast, it doesn't require, you know, the additional steps of having to do that. And so that's just more the reason to make sure that your work area is clean, and make sure that your material is thinned and appropriate for your spray equipment. So that's another big thing, is that if you have a turbine, then you need to make sure that your material is thinned enough to work in your equipment. And so, or really any other kind of material. You know, if you have an airless, then what you'll probably have to do is add something to keep the lacquer from kind of clogging the tip. What'll end up happening is that you'll get a lot of dry lacquer at the tip of the gun on the airless, although you can use an airless for lacquer. I think there's some kind of, like, I guess people use blush retarder or something like that to keep it from clogging the tip. But yeah, it's just important to make sure that your material is ready to go. That way, you know, you don't have to sand out any orange peel or anything like that, and you can just kind of, you know, quickly and efficiently get to doing the next coat. You don't really need to sand for adhesion purposes with lacquer. So these are the little kind of, I guess, imitation locks. And I bought some new hardware, but I didn't have anything to replace those. So I shined them up as much as I could with some barkeeper's friend. And basically I just turned it into a paste and I let it sit. And if I do want to keep the hardware, this is kind of the method of choice that I have. So I'm being kind of careful here, but I wanted to get all the hardware in and kind of lightly close the drawers because the lacquer's still going to be a little bit soft, even pre-catalyzed lacquer this soon. It's only been drying for like an hour. So I put the hardware on very gently and I make sure not to really close the doors, and I got some pictures of them. I need to hammer in those little lock sets, but other than that, that's it. This is done. Um, I got it posted, and it's had a lot of positive feedback on Facebook Marketplace, although it hasn't been purchased yet. But yeah, if you want to learn how to do a gloss coating, I think this is a pretty good video to go to. So if you're interested in this kind of content, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.